Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Large Format Photography Podcast. My name is Simon Forster and I'm joined by my co-host Andrew Bartram and Travis Linville in Chicago. Hello Andrew.
Hi Simon.
And hello Travis.
Hello Simon.
Right, first of all I just want to say thank you to Bill Schwab for being our guest on our last show. Now normally I'd say that was like 2 weeks ago, but it was longer than that, and I think we just need to issue a formal apology for Andrew and I not being able to actually get any time together at the same time as a guest as well. So yeah, it's been a while since we last spoke and last did the podcast. So hopefully next time it won't be quite so long.
Maybe.
But who knows? Yeah, that's how it goes. I mean, we try to set ourselves up for 20 shows a year, so we've already lost one of those now. So we'll see where we get up to by the end of it. Okay, so let's move things straight on to what have you been getting up to, Andrew?
Well, I've been getting very excited in amongst feeling very poorly, but don't mind me, I'll soldier through this recording. But I've been getting very excited about our event that we're holding in May. So following on from the wonderful Bill Schwab, who you mentioned, we decided to launch our own, well, in fact, we'd talked about it before then, but it kind of came into focus after we'd spoken to Bill Schwab. We announced, if you go to the Facebook group, the Large Format Photography Facebook group, you will see at the very top of the page the announcement of the LFPP 2020 Gathering in the Forest. So that kind of suggests there's going to be more of these things. Well, let's just wait and see if anyone turns up to this one first. So, folks listening, tell your friends, come along yourselves. If you've never camped, now's your time to learn how to camp. Meredith Wilson has no excuse. She claims to be a hardy Australian outback girl, but apparently has never been camping. Friday, 29th of May to Sunday, 31st of May for UK listeners. That's not the bank holiday, that's the weekend after.
Yes, so we got it wrong last time, didn't we?
No, you did. I'm sure I was completely correct. So I'm going to be there on the Friday. Julie and I will be travelling down with Stella the Sterling Caravan. And we'll be there for lunchtime-ish, early afternoon. I guess Steve Segersby is coming down on the Friday. And there's probably half a dozen others. The Sandeha Lynch, who's been on the show, is going to be there. Someone suggested we need to have s'mores and ghost stories, but I didn't know what they were, so I disregarded what he said. Toby Vandervelde said, ooh, so I'm not sure that Toby's coming. Jeremy North is coming.
Yeah, so, not 100%. I was I saw Jeremy at the weekend,
okay.
and I'm not entirely sure if he's camping or whether he's just going to head over on the Saturday night. I
can imagine he'll find a hotel accommodation somewhere and just drive up in his open-top Bentley with his cravat on.
Well, he doesn't live too far away from there. Actually, it's just worth pointing out. I mean, you've given the dates there from the Friday to the Sunday. The main event, the gala evening, is the Saturday night. So if you go before then, it's more about just catching up with and chatting and getting out there and taking some pictures. But as far as the actual gathering is concerned, the official gathering is on the Saturday night, and you don't have to have a tent if you're in the vague vicinity.
You can just have a sleeping bag.
Well, yeah, there's that, and but you can always just come on over. I think Graham Jago of the Sunny 16 podcast has indicated that he might come along, although I don't think he fancies staying in the tent, but I think he might just pop along for the evening.
Excellent. Well, it's worth also pointing out that because in most families, there's probably someone who's really into photography and their partner may not be quite so interested. So, we're not going to be geeking out, well, not unless you really want to, all day long and all together as a big group. People can do what they want. If folks want to go off together, they can do. Or not, if you just want to go off and visit a museum or go canoeing down the River Wye, then that's okay. I think the idea is that we come together in the evening for a bit of geekery and large format chat, and we hope that some of the more learned folks are going to give us a bit of a talk. And so we're very pleased to have Steve Segersby with us, and I'm sure he's got a lot to say about what he's been up to with his platinum printing. And of course, Dave Shrimpton is going to be there. And Dave, who does lots of wet plate photography, amongst other stuff, is bringing some kind of, well, I want to call it a wet plate trailer, but I don't think it's that grand. I'm not sure what it is he's bringing, but something to enable him to coat his plates or his glass plates or his aluminium plates or whatever he's using out in the field. Pretty much like the old American settlers out west with their wagons. And Travis, do you have a wagon to coat your glass plates in or your metal plates?
I don't. Typically, when I go on location, I'm just kind of shoving everything in the back of my car and hoping it all is still together by the time I get to my destination. But no wagon of sorts.
So what are you using at the moment? Because with this process, and you're having to coat and sensitize your plates pretty much close to the time when you expose the image, aren't you?
Right, and it's the dark box that I use gone through several versions. So the first was simply a cardboard box. I'd usually spray paint the inside black and cut out one side. On certain boxes, I would cut a window out and cover it with some sort of ruby glass or something that would prevent exposure. On occasion, I would just keep the box enclosed, and then while I was inside it, I would have a battery-powered light, some sort of red light or red LED as a way to see what I was doing in there. And after I got tired of the cardboard box, I noticed that there were some people that were converting old, a lot of times like army suitcases, bigger suitcases, bigger carrying trunks, and they would convert those into mobile dark rooms. And I thought that aesthetic paired well with the process. And so I did a version of that, and it was fine. It was a little cramped, and while it was functional, I was looking for an easier solution. And so what I currently use is PVC pipe, just that you would get at the hardware store. And I assemble a basic skeleton for a box and then drape fabric over it. It all packs down quite easily and is resistant to the chemicals and has been a better solution for me.
So you don't have you thought about maybe, like Brendan Barry, getting a mobile darkroom or a caravan or some kind of RV to travel around in? Then you can just do it all in one go, can't you? You can travel and have your darkroom.
That is, yeah, I've thought about that. It does save a lot of setup because anywhere I go, the setup takes quite a bit of time just to get it up and running on location. And so, having a traveling darkroom would certainly help. I'd say with the frequency that I do that, I think it would go unused a lot because I'm working the majority of the time out of various studios. And also the nice thing about the current configuration I have is that it's very customizable. So I've set it up in hotel bathrooms and, just about anywhere I can customize it and reconfigure the PVC box, to a different size, different dimensions to fit in smaller spaces or larger spaces. And so that's been the biggest benefit to me, even though it has a little bit less of the kind of flash and aesthetic that might pair with this process. It's been easy to adapt to a lot of different situations.
I'm just wondering if you can get some kind of canvas or something just to go over the top of it, like one of those like that you get covered, like a covered wagon back in the day.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think the one thing that we kind of struggle with anywhere on location, particularly if it's outside, is definitely wanting to be able to stop the light, but then also the fumes are quite strong, so you need to have some sort of ventilation or air it out frequently. And also, if it's warm at all, the heat can be quite uncomfortable when you're under there, and the heat also can affect the behavior of your chemicals substantially.
Yeah, the film sweats that you get are going to be quite significantly different and more dangerous than the ones that most people are used to with trying to get things onto a Patterson tank and things like that.
But some of the results that I've had in less than ideal conditions, I've loved it. It's not been anything that I would have done on purpose, but when you see maybe the plates drying out quicker than you would like, or the higher temperatures affecting the performance of your collodion or your silver bath, you get results and you get artifacts on the plate that sometimes are, depending on your preference, can be quite attractive.
Well, that's an interesting point. I mean, that was when we had Joseph Brunzius on the show, who we talked about with the collodion wet plates and such. And when we went to select the artwork, because the idea is we would pick a shot that works with the our logo in a square format and things, and the shot that I chose off his site was one that he said, "Oh, you picked that one." It wasn't a technically from a development point of view, it wasn't technically technically as good as he can achieve. So it had these, I'm going to fall to a better artifacts. It had these artifacts on it, which I found particularly attractive. But the professional in Joseph didn't like them because he saw something that he could have done better. But that's exactly the kind of thing you're describing there, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think you'll see a range of attitudes with regards to that. Certainly people who practice, regardless of their aesthetic preferences, they do want to have a degree of control and mastery. And if they have those things occur, they want to have them happen, hopefully with some degree of intention. Even if on the first instance, it's something that happens by surprise. Usually most of the people I talk with that are working in wet plate, they want to be able to repeat the result if it's desirable, even if it's incorrect by kind of pure practice standards.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and I'm really looking forward to this gathering because I'm just imagining the number of people who are actually going to be there that are going to be taking pictures of other photographers. I mean, Dave Shrimpton is a very, very much a person photographer, and I know, Andrew, you've already worked out exactly what kit's going to come along with you for that purpose.
It's sitting next to me, and I'll tell you about that. But what I didn't announce, I don't think, was actually where we're holding this event. Did I? I said it was in the forest, but that doesn't limit it. Could be anywhere, couldn't it?
It could be. And actually, just in case of our memory might be failing us as to what it is that we may have said or not have said, this is complicated by the fact that this is actually the second time we've got this far in the conversation because I forgot to press record.
Yeah, so now I'm not sure what I've said and what I haven't said.
Exactly. So we're on round two of talking about this. This is why up until that point it was unusually slick for us so far this week.
I wouldn't go that far.
No, perhaps not. So it's if you have said it, then let's say it again.
Yes, so it's in the Forest of Dean, which is that bit of England that's nearly Wales. So you're okay. It's not quite foreign country, and it's called Bracelands, not Gracelands, where Elvis lives. Brace with a B. Bracelands Campground, and there's a link from the Facebook group if you don't do Facebook, and many of you may not, then you need to go online and type in Bracelands, Bracelands campground.
Well, I'm going to say there's another way, and that's going to be our miraculously appearing Instagram account.
Oh, yeah. Well, people might not do any of those things. They might just listen to us on podcasts, but they might not do Instagram or Facebook. Yeah,
it's usually the people do one or the other, but at least it's another way. And we do now have a Instagram account, and believe it or not, it's called Large Format Photography Podcast. But so if you can find us there, I'll put a post up which will have some details in it somehow. It's not very good for posting links from Instagram, but there'll be some information that will at least get you in the direction of wherever you need to go. So just find our very sparse LFPP account on Instagram for a few more details if you can't get to Facebook.
Yeah, so it's going to be great fun. Forest of Dean is somewhere that I've had a kind of fascination with for so many years, since watching Dennis Potter, Singing Detective. Was it Singing Detective?
Yeah.
It might be. Part of that was set in the Forest of Dean. And everyone was just so weird. It was a bit like being in the deep south of America. They weren't exactly playing banjos in the trees, but it was a bit like that, So I've no idea. Stephen Teggersby's quite excited about Forest of Dean, but then he comes from the Fens like me, so it's probably like, it's like his relatives are down there. Anyway, so before I go insult anybody else who's not here to defend themselves, I'm actually staring at my camera that I'm taking with me. I'm taking my Italian BOM 4x5 camera with me, which doesn't get a great deal of use. I tend to use my Toyo 45A camera most of the time, but this BOM camera is lovely. But I struggle to use it because I just use my Toyo. So this is now going to be my dry plate camera, maybe wet plate one day if I ever get that far. So I've got that lens that turned up from eBay, Simon, the French Eurography Virtuelle.
Yes, lens. That one.
Yeah, which looks great. I took it apart and cleaned it a bit with some isopropyl alcohol, and I shine a bright light through it. But I wasn't that worried. It looks okay, and put it back together again. So it has two elements, I think, just a screw out back element and then a front element, and it has some nice iris blades that close down to f20 odd maybe. No shutter, of course. But I've been looking at the Jason Lane dry plates, and I'll probably just go with the low ISO 2 one. I think that was the one that's best suited to what I've got in mind, but I can't remember that. But I'll probably end up buying both sets of plates, and then I'll put my large format photographer's hat over the lens, and that'll be my, I reckon, ISO 2. I should be able to time that with taking the hat out of the way and putting the hat back again.
Travis, what's your preferred method of shutter? Do you use a large format photographer's hat, or have you got some other way of doing it?
I've got just homemade caps that are loose enough for some of the lenses, that seem to do the trick. And then if earlier you saw in the background, I've currently got the giant camera set up more in a copy stand fashion. And for that, to be honest, I've just been shooting at night. And so it's just the strobes themselves when I'm using the strobe lights. Those are my shutter for interior copy stand style work.
Dave Shrimpton has a bowler hat, which I think is just superb.
Yeah.
I was hunting around. Every photographer has at least one drawer full of what we might say odds and sods, bits and pieces that you think, I'll put that in there for a handy day, for a day when I'm looking for something. And I actually found a lens cap with Olympus written on the front of it, and it just fits over this old French lens, Simon, with just enough friction to hold it there, but not enough so that if I take it off, it can act as a shutter. So that's what I'm going to use. That's
exactly what I used on mine. I think it's from an Olympus Trip, I think it is.
Could be.
Actually, no, it's not. It's definitely a small one, and it goes on my Cook triplet. It fits it absolutely perfectly.
Yeah. So I was very pleased. And I managed to fashion a lens board eventually out of an old photo frame, bit of black that sort of stiff board. And I went in the darkroom with a strong LED torch, put a dark slide on the back, a cup film holder in the back, put my torch in and checked for light leaks around the edge, and it seems okay. So I think I'm good to go. So I'm going to shoot Jason Lane dry plates and do, in my mind, oldie-fashioned portraits of the large format photographers who turn up to our event. So they've got to be there. I want you all to grow beards before you turn up, please, and have some kind of hat, because I don't. And then you're going to pose by your camera, and I'll make dry plate pictures of everybody. But I thought I might use FP4 as well, because I'm not convinced that I'll be that successful.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea having a contingency plan, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, but the fast ISO for J-Lane plates is 25.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Now I'm going to have to go back to my messenger conversation I had with Jason Lang, because I was talking to him. What I really want to use these dry plates for is for salt printing. So, and for for salt prints, you need an emulsion that's got a long tonal range. The negative doesn't really need to be contrasty, but it needs to have good shadows and good highlights, and but it helps if it's quite dense as well. So one of those two, and I can't remember whether it's the ISO 2 or the ISO 25, and I'm desperately looking through my Instagram conversations that I had with
Jason,
yeah. Well done. There he is. So he said, yeah, ISO 2. That's right. So so this works actually. So the ASA ISO 2 glass plate that he makes is described as having a very long tonal range, and of course that would be helpful to me because I haven't got a shutter. So I'm going to probably go with the ISO 2 glass plates for my salt printing ideas, because that I think that'll give the best sort of negative. But for the portraits, I'm probably going to go with a 25, which means people can perhaps don't have to stand still for quite as long.
And have you remembered the rules about what the actual kind of light that you've got is going to affect the ISO rating as well?
Well, it's the same with all those sort of orthochromatic type films, I think. I'm struggling a bit. Maybe Travis can help us, but it depends how much UV light is present. So the effective speed of any of those things, it happens with X-ray film, it happens with Ilford ortho film, it happens with Harman direct positive paper. The effective speed and sensitivity of the paper will vary depending on where you are in the world, how much UV light there is, whether it's 12 o'clock noon or evening sunshine. I'm not talking nonsense, am I, Travis? Help me out here.
No, and certainly in the case of collodion, that's going to, UV is going to be a significant requirement for that, and that's where sometimes we're running into problems with the various bulbs, or if we're using artificial lighting, as in some of them will have a degree of UV coating. Same goes for lenses, in cases where that can impact the exposure you're getting.
So how do you work that out? I mean, obviously, if you use an equipment and you know your equipment, if it's been affected by coatings, but if you're out in the field and you can't control the light as such, is there a rule of thumb that you would use to think, well, today the ISO is 1 and then the afternoon it's less, always more than that? I mean, how do you define that?
I mean, it can be comparable to how artists traditionally would approach, film estimations when our meters fail us, and we have those broad strokes kind of methods like Sunny 16, and when you're using film and so forth, and there's comparable sort of, I think, sensitivity that you can develop with collodion as well, but a lot of it, I think, is just trial and error. Even when things are clipping along as expected with collodion, things seem to go wacky for me, and just the various variables, can be hard to predict, or just fickle in terms of how they respond to relative humidity, particularly if you're going on location, But yeah, I think a lot of it just ends up being trial and error. I wish I could say I had a degree of mastery over it, where it was more definitive than that, but a degree of comfort with a number of failures before you're going to get to an achievable result that you're happy with.
So I don't think we asked this of Joseph when he was with us, but I'm just wondering what the situation is with, and I'm assuming this is the right word, but exposure latitude. How forgiving is wet plate?
I honestly don't know compared to film in terms of exposure latitude, how it would rate. I've never quite investigated that, but. And I think with a lot of the processes I'm working with, and although these days it's been mostly wet plate collodion, I think it ends up just being the fact that I'm changing situations and circumstances so much, while the latitude might be the same. My light sources are shifting maybe on a daily or weekly basis, or I'm going from in to outside. So I've kind of worked against myself in terms of establishing any sort of consistent methodology with my approach, because I'm shifting circumstances so frequently. But to me, that's been always the fun of it. Not to say that I have any degree of absolute mastery over it, but I think when the results become too predictable for me, I start to lose interest from a technical standpoint. And, maybe that's a cop out, but I look for those things that are going to be a little bit more unexpected, and I think that's what initially drew me to collodion. Is I was pretty comfortable with film and certainly aspects of digital, and the collodion was one where I knew I'd be thrown off a bit repeatedly.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how you actually ascertain the correct exposure value for a given shot, and what difference. Because obviously I assume you're controlling it more with aperture than you are with shutter speed. Would that be? Well, then again, though, some of these are going to be quite long exposures as well, I guess.
Well, are you asking Simon? Sorry, Travis. Are you asking Travis Simon? For goodness' sake! Let me just get my. I'm blaming the coronavirus that I seem to be coming down with. How do you coat the plate? How do you get the film speed right? That's probably what I'm trying to say in my most incompetent manner. How do you coat to get a given film speed?
Well, we have different recipes of collodion that are out there, and sometimes people will fiddle with that on their own, just like they would in any cooking or other enterprise. But and some of them can be quite fast. For example, UV Photographics has a certain recipes that they sell that are going to have a higher ISO. The one that I use is where I originally learned at the George Eastman House, the Scully and Mark Osterman basic recipe for their collodion, and that's worked really well for me, and it's had a really good shelf life, which has been important for me because some weeks I'll be able to do quite a bit of work, and then I might go a couple weeks where given my other demands on my time, I won't be able to do as much. And so the shelf life has been really important. And so the recipe that I use, factors in, I think, about 1, ISO 1. And some of the others that are out there and available, they're going to have different, not only sensitivities, but just like traditional films that you could purchase, they're going to have different ways they express the tonality. So they're recipes that will be made more for portraiture, and of course you can use them any way that you want, but they're customized and designed for unique purposes. So
let's. How are we doing for your week, Andrew?
My week. Well, I was holding back on whether to ask Travis to delve more into the process of making up the collodion and all that sort of stuff, but we'll perhaps hold that off.
I think we should
for a moment. We'll hold off on that for a moment because I was conscious that we haven't actually really got very far through our weeks.
No.
But one more thing I would like to give a shout out to on that very same Italian bomb camera. I've never really been happy with the ground glass on it, and I did get a slightly upgraded ground glass. It was sent to me from Italy. I've never been that happy, really. So I went on to the Facebook group just around Christmas time, I think, and poked around. And I asked generally the group, anyone got any experience of either making ground glass or someone I can go to? And Sandeha Lynch pointed me to a gentleman in Lithuania who it appears that quite a lot of other people have used as well. In fact, Steve Lloyd of Chroma Cameras has used him to make ground glass for his Chroma 4.5 cameras. And this gentleman is on eBay, and he's under Vist, V-I-S-T camera. His name is Virgis, I think Virgis, and it's www.vist.lt. And you can specify exact measurements, whether you want corners cut out, which I did. I wanted the corners cut off. And I think I paid a grand total, including postage. It was certainly under £20, maybe about 17 or 18. And it came in a wooden box, really well packaged up. And Yeah, and because I'd measured the old one carefully, it dropped straight in. I replaced, so that went straight in with the. Remember what side facing the lens, Simon? It's the rough side.
Rough side to the glass.
Yeah. Facing the lens.
Yeah.
And then I had already on my bomb camera, I had a piece of clear glass with grid markings on, and I just put that back on top, replaced the 2 little screws that held the clips in place, and I did some test shots in the garden because I was then paranoid that I was going to get focus shifts like you had, and did some carefully focused pictures in the garden, and I developed those 2 sheets of FP4, or it might have been Fomapan, with 2 sheets of X-ray film, that Fuji blue X-ray film I use. And I used Jeff Perry's 20th century camera reel for both the X-ray film and the FP4, and I developed them in Caffenol CL for 70 minutes, stand development. And I demonstrated 2 things. One, Jeff's 20th century reel doesn't scratch the negatives. In fact, I got the best negatives I've ever had, despite, I've been developing them. Thank you. I've been developing the negatives in trays with glass bottoms, but they were still scratched to have we got an expletive rating on this podcast? Well, they were badly scratched anyway, should we just say. But using Jeff's spiral is printed spiral, double-sided X-ray film. It was fantastic. And I also demonstrated that Caffenol CL also works pretty well as well, I think, because it's a sort of compensating type developer. And so that X-ray film is very contrasty. But the fact that I chucked the FP4 in there to test my focus on the new screen, and they came out bitingly sharp. So, I clearly very skillfully replaced my ground glass and put it the right way round. And so for less than 20 quid, I've got now a really bright ground glass. And Sandeha Lynch recommended this guy, and also it appears that these things have gone in the chroma cameras as well. So I'll put a note to the show notes to Mr. Virgis in Lithuania. And he also sells some really interesting stuff. He sells collapsible pinhole cameras with bellows on as well. And he makes like a little pinhole shutter. He's got a really interesting eBay site. So check that out. Vist.lt. So that's my week, or not week really, but some things I've been up to.
Fortnight and a half.
Yes, and other things as well. But hey, It's not about me. What have you been up to?
Well, I'll keep mine brief as well, because last time it was so brief, I don't think I even did it.
No.
Because we were just having it was just getting far too interesting with Bill. I can't actually remember where I was going. I know that I was talking about my Aero Hector experience, my latest Aero Hector experience, and I'd had the back of the lens chamfered off a little bit, so I could actually push it through the front standard of my speed graphic, and that worked a treat. So I was able to print a new holder for its lens board, which makes it sit that further back. So it's just the balance of the camera is just much better now than it was. But one thing I've done with that camera since at the one evening at the 6 Times Darkroom in Stoke-on-Trent, please come along, was one of the members there, Robert Price, who's also in the group, and there's a reasonable chance he'll be listening to this podcast as well. He brought along his oscilloscope and some bits of kit, and we did some speed testing on the shutter, the focal plane shutter on the speed graphic, because I was feeling it was overexposing for the settings I was using, and which is not really that much of a surprise, because unless it's one of those things is serviced well and regularly, your shutter speeds are going to be out. Well, they were very out. I think the fastest shutter speed I got out of it, and it's 1,000th of a second. I think it got up to about 300th of a second, maybe. It might have wheezed there.
It's best to err on the side of overexposure, Simon. You know that.
Well, yeah, that's it. It was helping me. And then all the other shutter speeds were correspondingly slower than that. And really, the only shutter speed that actually worked at the stated speed was around about a 30th of a second. And as Paul Bullock, also a member of our group and listens to this podcast, he indicated, well, that's obvious, isn't it? Because that's the one with the less load upon it. So therefore, it should actually have more of a chance of being more accurate in the first place. And so there you go. So I've been given some advice on how to get it retentioned and serviced. Somebody, I can't remember who it was, so if you're listening to this, I do apologise, but sent me some details via Instagram and a link that I need to read properly.
So, sorry, perhaps I wasn't listening properly, which is often the case. Is this the focal plane cloth shuttery thing?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. You can. I'm sure Matt Marash. I'm sure was talking about tensioning those things.
Yeah. Well, apparently it's not that difficult. Yeah, because I was saying to this chap, I'll take it to my repairman, and said, no, do it yourself. And I was thinking, oh, okay. So I now feel like I need to do it myself, or at least give it a go.
Pressure's
anyway.
on now, isn't it? Pressure's on.
It is. And I want to take that with me to the gathering in the forest as well, because I want to use my aeroactile there. That'll be really cool.
It will.
Yeah, because everybody else is using fancy cameras and clothing and all this kind of stuff, so I need an aeroactile just to keep up with everybody.
Did you not back the dry plate holder on Kickstarter?
No, but actually we've touched upon that, and the reason being is I've got a wet plate camera. Well, I've got a camera which I think will take dry plates.
Oh, that thing I had for a while.
That's it, yeah. And it's now back with me, and I've not used it either. But there you go. That's got a cloth roller Thornton Pickard shutter on that one anyway, which appears to work, but it's just a bit scary.
It does. It is. Yeah.
Okay, so just what other things? I've 3D printed a filter holder for the DeVere.
I saw that.
Yeah. Well, I've actually on round 2 of that. Oh, actually, no, you would have seen the new one, because I posted it in the Light in the Dark podcast group. I didn't actually put it into our group, I don't think. But and that's now gone on to the DeVere 7705 or whatever it's called, and it works. It works absolutely perfectly. So I'm really, really pleased with that. I'm loving 3D printing. It's all good stuff. And then one last thing over the weekend. It's not large format, but it's got a bit of a connection, possibly one day. I was at the Sunny 16 photo walk around Oxford, and that organised by...
That looked fun, didn't it?
It was great.
It was better than the annual mystery gathering. I reckon the one in Oxford was far better.
quite clearly, and 22 of us went along. Nobody with large format, unfortunately, including myself.
You should have done.
Yeah, but thanks to Sunny 16, or in particular Graham Jago, for organising that, who may show his face at the gathering, along with Jeremy North may show his face at the gathering on the Saturday night. But there's a chap there called Dave Walker, and I've mentioned this on...
he's the brownie shutter...
Robot brownie
man, isn't he?
That's right. And he was there. And he's got a prototype LCD shutter running in his 620 Brownie, and it worked. I've seen the pictures now. It actually worked. So where this is a potential.
Hang on. What did you say? I was processing the words as you were saying. LCD shutter. Did you say?
LCD, so an electronic LCD shutter. So that it's I think it's actually two pieces of two LCD screens that use polarized light at 90 degrees. So it's just like when you get two polarizers, linear polarizers, and you turn them through 90 degrees, then it goes virtually black. And the principle is the same, but it can be electronically controlled.
Wow!
So
I saw the little electronic gubbins he was developed, which was effectively the timing circuit, I suppose.
Yeah,
but and he had that very basically a couple of elastic bands held it to the camera, from what I could see.
Yeah, it's.
I didn't.
It wasn't.
I didn't realize it. I didn't realize it. Sort of done something to the shutter as well. Wow.
Well, he hasn't. He's added a shutter that goes in behind the lens, and this is really where it comes up. And by the way, if you want to look at that piece of kit, if you just go onto Instagram and look up Dave the Walker, then you'll find it there. But the point is that where this gets particularly interesting for the large format people amongst us is has the potential of eventually, because it's early days and there'll be a fair bit of work to do to actually make this work, but you could feasibly fit one of these things actually inside a large format camera that doesn't and use lenses that don't have a shutter, and you can use higher shutter speeds with film without a focal plane shutter. But we're quite some way away from that, and there's lots of problems. How do you get the thing in there? You're going to have to go in through the ground glass screen to fit it onto the back of the lens, and all sorts of problems. But the potential is there, and I think that's quite exciting, really. So that's me done, and let's head over to Chicago. This is almost like being on the Classic Lenses podcast.
I was then going to say, so what's the weather like in Chicago, Johnny?
Yes, exactly.
Sorry, Travis.
Yeah, so we'll ask Travis, what's the weather like in Chicago?
Yeah, we got a bit of snow finally, so it's been pretty mild, but yeah, we have snow. In fact, I was out last night as it was coming down for a couple hours doing some long exposures. I was with a Sony A7 III last night, so shooting digitally.
Yeah, I think shooting at night with digital do I dare say it's better? Certainly, I'm certainly happier with the results that I get shooting digitally than I do shooting film. Although I see some shots shot with like CineStill in areas where there's street lighting and neon signs and things, and I think they look great. But in general terms, I prefer digital at night.
Well, Bill Schwab's digital. I did question him as to whether they were film or digital. I wasn't really sure. Because I've seen some cracking CineStill shots, and they did look a bit like that, but no, they were digital, weren't they?
Yeah.
I think he said something about making them hyper real, which means he must be tweaking them somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So Travis, what have you been up to lately?
Most recently, I was I'm trying to correct or fix or modify the homemade 16 by 20 inch wet plate holder that I have for my larger camera. It's had some design flaws I needed to correct, and so I've been working on that gradually. It was when I first made it, I was primarily working with glass plates and making either large ambrotypes or glass negatives. In that, it seemed to be the more practical way to go, even though glass takes a little bit more preparation. The rigidity of the glass works well for a holder of that scale. And so I started, just to save time, or I thought I was saving time, using aluminum plates instead, which are already kind of ready to go and work as a wet plate process and make large tintypes. Unfortunately, the plates at that size don't have the rigidity to keep them from bowing in the plate holder. So I had to do some modifications to that to hold the plate in without having a bend in it affecting the focal plane.
Yeah, as you were talking there about aluminum, whatever, I was trying to remember a photography supplier that I think I just rediscovered yesterday, and I think they're in the Republic of Ireland, and I can't find them now because they're called something like maybe Photo Supplies or something. And they're an excellent resource for alternative photosupplies.ie, because they were selling ready. Is that it? I don't know. It might be them. They were selling very diverse bits of kit, and some of the stuff they were selling was aluminium ready-made plates. And I think we touched on this with Joseph, didn't we, about where he sources his plates from. But are these things that you buy ready-made? Because they have to be quite clean, don't they, Travis?
Yeah,
is that right?
the metal I get from a trophy supply company, and a lot of people here in the States uses them. They just coincidentally happen to be right down the road from me in the Chicago suburbs in Mount Prospect. And so I get most of my aluminum from them and have it cut to various sizes, or I'll get larger sheets and cut it down myself. Sometimes I'm working on like a mini Graflex and doing tintypes that are 2.5 by 3.5 inches. And then most recently I've been messing around with the larger homemade camera and doing 16 by 20. But I get the aluminum from them. It comes, coated with a peel-off plastic, so it's quite clean when you prepare it and pour the collodion on. And however, the glass, you have to do a bit more cleaning yourself and preparation. And I tend to coat the edges of the glass with albumin. So I just get a dozen eggs from the grocery store and separate the whites and mix up my own albumin and coat the edges, and that keeps the collodion from flaking away off the edges of the plate.
Yeah, well, I can't actually find this site in Ireland, but somewhere I read on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, they were pointing folks to this site in Ireland, and they're selling lots of raw chemicals and aluminium plates and stuff like that. So this, the 20, did you say 20 by 16 plate holder that you made it yourself, did you, Travis? Is that right?
That's right.
Because finding these things on the open market must be tricky.
Well, I think they have some at that scale. They're quite expensive, though, and I wasn't sure when I first got into all this the degree to which I wanted to really get into it, and it's a slippery slope. And so, I was keeping the cost down, or so I thought, and just building my own, and I worked off the templates and design ideas that I had seen others post online, and so I took a run at it myself, and mine ended up being what I would say is overbuilt. It's extraordinarily heavy. I was concerned that my lack of woodworking skills would create flaws that would cause light leaks, and to compensate for that, I just simply overbuilt everything. I thought, larger corners, things like that would help correct for any lacking that I had in being able to work with the material and construct it appropriately. But it does result in a camera that's a behemoth, and it's essentially built out of 2x4s from the hardware store and garbage bag material. It's black 6 mil plastic that function as the bellows. I don't have a traditional bellows. It's just the plastic, and it's all supported on the interior with curtain rods, cheap curtain rods that slide at the four corners when I expand or contract the assembly.
That sounds really cool, and it's as soon as you start going down this route, I always think of the Homemade Camera podcast because they talk about this kind of thing all the time, as you might imagine, because that's what the whole show's about. So it's just interesting to hear different ways how people have constructed their homemade cameras, and I've not heard curtain rails being used before.
So I experimented with a few different things. At first, it was smaller PVC pipe nested in larger pipe, but it didn't quite hold its rigidity over the length of the camera, which is about 3 or 4 feet. And I can't remember. There were a few other things that I tried before I settled in on the curtain rod. Oh, bungee cords. I thought bungee cords would work, and that was a huge failure. So it just kind of get closer and closer to the result.
Travis, before we started recording, we caught a glimpse of a huge camera behind you. Is that the one that you were using on that occasion as a copy stand? Is that the one you were talking about?
That's right. Yeah.
So the bellows didn't look to be or the normal accordion collapsy type. So you've got a front standard and you've got your rear standard, and just explain to me where the curtain rails fit in.
So instead of bellows, it's essentially garbage bag material, like 6 millimeter black plastic,
right?
That I cut to fit. And so it just kind of scrunches like bag bellows, essentially. It scrunches together, but I did need armature kind of structure on the interior to prevent that from blocking the shot itself. And so the curtain rods are on the interior of that bellows, that false bellows, at each of the four corners, preventing it from collapsing in on the projection.
I see. Gotcha. And did you make, well, it sounds like you must have made the whole camera from scratch.
That's right. Yeah. This has been a few years, but Giles Clement posted the project that he had done to create a 16 by 20 camera out of wood, and I I saw that, and I'd already been doing wet plate a little bit, and was just fascinated by that. And I've always been fascinated by, despite all the amazing technology that we have photographically, especially now, that how simple it can be, at least in the basic, the fundamental needs to make an image, to capture an image, and it can be as complex or simple as you want. So I think I get a degree of satisfaction out of the camera actually being quite junky and still being able to create an image that, on appearance can look sophisticated or, like a capture from any device we might use.
No, I totally understand where you come from with that. I mean, that's when I got back into photography, I was adapting old lenses to digital, and the more odd the lens would look, whether it be some silver Russian thing or going onto a Sony camera or an Olympus or something like that, the happier I was. and it almost seemed to add to the quality of the photos. In the case of, it's a good photo, and look what I used to take it with.
Right.
So no, I totally get that. I think it's about time we found out a little bit more about who you are. So for the benefit of our listeners, we will give you the opportunity to introduce yourself. And just before we get to that, I just want to say thank you to Bob Matter, who listens to our show, and he bumped into you somewhere in Chicago, and got talking to you and mentioned us to you, and you said that sounds quite interesting, and then Bob sent an email to me saying, I found this really interesting guy, you should have him on the show. And that goes back well into last year. I think it might be in September last year, something like that.
That's right.
So you were added to our recommended list of people to talk to, and which is very, very long, I've got to say. And we finally got round to you. So it's great to get you on. And when we did our due diligence, which basically means go onto the guy's website. That's what our due diligence is. And I was knocked out by your photography. I mean, the front page is pretty much all the wet plate stuff. I mean, there's and we'll talk about your different projects that you have there. But certainly, if somebody is to go onto your website, which is travisbrianlinville.com, and we'll put a link in the notes as well, and mention that name again. But you'll see there are plenty of photographs there that are they all tintypes?
It's a mixture of tintypes and ambrotypes.
Yeah, and they're really, really distinctive. That's the nature of that recording medium anyway. But what strikes me about them is that you can tell they're modern, yet they're old. And I really like that. But perhaps if you could give our listeners a bit of a history about yourself, how you got here, and then we can delve a little bit deeper into your processes and working practices.
Sure, it was great to finally meet Bob in person. We'd been connected on social media for a while, but finally connected in person at around September, and so that was welcome meeting. So my background, without giving my entire life story, I got into photography in high school. Just classes were typical, then film photography. Everybody got their Pentax K1000, which I know comes up again and again. But that was the camera I learned on, and as a number of my friends were getting their first cars, which I knew I wouldn't have. The camera was kind of my machine to work with, and I dug into it pretty quickly. I went to school in Ohio and studied photography there, and then on to graduate school at Clemson in South Carolina. And so once I started, I was just kind of dug in and really enjoyed it. And of course, during that time, that was in the mid to late 90s, and so pretty much the majority of my education was in traditional analog photography, because even though that digital had arrived, it hadn't been integrated into a lot of programs. And so you came out of school expecting to know about digital, even if your your education didn't quite include it. And so a lot of my experience with digital is self-taught over the years. You sit down with back then, just a textbook, and you go through it page by page and work through Photoshop. But all my education and experiences was in the darkroom, and I have to say I was a little disappointed when digital did become so popular, because part of my fascination and what attracted me to photography was working in the darkroom, working with the chemicals, working with the film, knowing that there were limitations on the number of exposures you had, and so each one required that careful consideration. And so certainly digital has given us all sorts of great tools and abilities and technology, but I really did miss that connection that originally got me into photography altogether, which was the darkroom and film. And so, as we've seen in the past several years, there's been a bit of a resurgence and renaissance with film and just general interest in it altogether. But also we're seeing it married with a lot of the contemporary tools that we have for example, making digital negatives. So it's been nice to see it all come full circle, and I'm certainly happy that it's regained popularity, since that's what drew me into it originally. Professionally, after I got done with school, I taught for a short period for Clemson, and then taught for them for a summer session abroad. And then when I came back, I was looking for something more full-time, and I spent a year working at the National Office for the Society for Photographic Education, which was a nice opportunity because it just really got me the ability to network and meet and learn about the work of a lot of people working all over the country with photography. And after that year was up, I got back into teaching and taught at a couple schools down in Georgia. I was at Georgia College and State University for a year, and then a few years at Georgia Southern University before coming up here to where I'm teaching now at Elgin Community College. So I've been here since 2009.
It's something when you just talking there, something just struck me about the there's a relatively high percentage of our guests that are actually involved in education and large format photography. I'm just wondering if there's a correlation there between the photography educators and large format.
I would say definitely. I mean, if only for, from a practical standpoint, I think there are a lot of professionals that just when things switched over to digital, they were compelled to make that jump as quickly as possible when everyone really saw it moving that direction, just for expedience and what clients were expecting. And then I think in academia, you have there's maybe two factors. There's the luxury of just being able to hold on to those things just because you value them if you want, even if something else comes along, you can hopefully sustain both. And then also sometimes it just has to do with the slow moving wheels within certain circles or certain aspects of academia. Those things might, when you have whole programs and departments built around one model or one method, making the transition to an entirely new system is going to take time. And I think for that reason, both for wanting to maintain the traditional methods and also just the slow moving of the process at times, we have a lot of people in education that are going to be either versed in it, or if they didn't have that as their experience themselves, then they have the benefit of being able to explore those things within the context of a higher education platform.
So, Travis, what's in a Travis Linville curriculum? What do you teach over a year or however long you have students for? What does it look like?
Well, I think we try to start it off with just a general philosophy, which is if we look at painters, their raw materials paint, and ceramic artists, they're working with clay, and we look at the raw material that other artists work with, and we try and communicate to our students that their raw material is not film, their raw material is not pixels, their raw material is light. And so if we start from that standpoint, we can be as technical or as playful as we want. We can really push the boundaries of how we experiment or how we think about these devices are working in terms of how we're capturing and manipulating that light, and how faithful we want to stay to the particular techniques, or how we want to jump wildly away from them if we choose, depending on our goals and our aims and how we want to use photography. And so as for the curriculum itself, we offer our students for their initial class, they can take they're still kind of siloed in those categories that we traditionally use, which we have digital 1 and film 1. So even though we're trying to step away from them, thinking in those strict categories, the courses are still designed in that way. And so just for practical reasons in terms of the equipment that we need to teach with. And so they'll take either one of those classes, but we tend to cover essentially the same concepts and the same topics in either one of those classes. And, if they work in the darkroom first and elect to go take the digital classes later, they get into the digital class after they've taken darkroom, and suddenly they realize what the burning and dodging tools do, without having had any previous experience, because they've done that in the darkroom, and then vice versa, right? They're going to perhaps have a better understanding of ISO if they've taken digital first, because they might be manipulating that shot to shot, unlike their film class, where once they put a roll of film in, they're working primarily with that sensitivity. And so we've tried to embrace that fluidity between the different methods. And so for most of our beginning students, they're going to take either one of those courses and be encouraged to work back and forth. And once they've taken either one, we really invite them to come back and use those spaces as much as they would like.
And you have a reasonably equipped darkroom as well, by the sounds of it?
We do. We have a 15-station large darkroom that's used predominantly for black and white work. We also occasionally run our wet plate work out of that. It's a double-sided sink, and so we either have both sides running with full chemistry, or we have one side that we reserve for perhaps alt process or wet plate when our advanced students are working with that. Yeah,
I was going to say, you're going to at some point. I didn't know, but you've kind of said as much. At some point, you're introducing sort of alternative processes to these. How old are these students, Travis?
It's quite varied. We're a community college, and so we do have the traditional 18 to maybe 22-year-old student, but we also get quite a few students that are age coming to take classes. And so some have had experience in photography before. It's kind of all over the place. We get students who have never heard of film, and then we get students too who might be challenged working digitally, right?
I wonder about those. You touched upon it there about those. There are some students who are just unaware of film and they come to a photography course, and I'm just wondering. I'd always want to be a fly on the wall when they first clap eyes on a large format camera. And I'm just wondering what kind of range of reactions you get with your students that come into contact with large format photography perhaps for the first time, and if it's something that leaves a lasting impression on them, or they're really happy to get away from it and back onto something more handleable.
Well, I certainly hope so, because I start the classes, even Darkroom 1, Photo 1, I start the class with large format photography, which they don't use. They do it as part of our first couple weeks of classes. They all get 35 millimeter cameras checked out to them, but I want to start them with that just because I want them to understand the simplicity. Certainly large format has a lot of complexity to it as well, but I take off the back of the camera, the backstander with the ground glass, and I say, here's where all the electronics go. And when they see it's just an empty box, or if it's a camera that I've got set up for wet plate and it's got an old brass lens on it, we say nose to ass, brass and glass. It's there's not really much in between, and I have them work in small groups, taking portraits of each other, because that's an easy way to get them excited about working in that process. And some of them are tentative, but they work as groups, and I assign each one of them a different control. someone's in charge of resetting the shutter. Someone's in charge of paying attention to the aperture setting. Someone's in charge of making sure that the film is loaded in the holders. And we're using paper negatives, so they get the more immediate gratification of seeing the result. Those that have no idea what a negative is learn about that negative process in the first couple weeks. And also I'm already introducing them to the print development process, and in that way introducing them to the film development process, which has pretty much the same steps. So the class used to begin with like several weeks of lecture, and what you would see is a group of students come in very excited about learning photography, and you would lecture at them for a few weeks, and you would just witness the passion drain out of the room and the excitement fade. And so several years ago, I was just searching for ways to correct that and get them in and working with it right off the bat in a way where they would experience that. And so I think they quite like the large format, a lot of them, and I think it even incentivizes them to stick around perhaps and maybe be able to work with those cameras at the higher levels in the fact that they get to do that in the first couple weeks. And I think it makes it more meaningful when you put a K1000 in their hand and all those things are happening internally where they really don't get to witness it. They now have somewhat of an understanding of what's happening inside the camera because they've worked with the large format from day one.
Yeah, I think that's a really innovative and clever way of teaching, to throw the students effectively straight into that situation without, to my mind, you'd have to think, well, I've got to explain what an aperture is and what a shutter is and how the medium responds to light. And, that's presumably the old way that you used to do it, the 2 weeks of lectures. But actually, you just throw them straight at the camera and they're kind of learning on the job, aren't they? They'll ask questions and they'll say, well, why does that lens close down? And they might not even use those terminologies, but how come the hole changes shape? And so they'll learn as they go along, and it's hands-on as well, which is just brilliant.
Well, that's the hope, and I think I have a great deal to learn about, how to be an effective teacher. But one of the things that in the time that I have been teaching, I realized is that I was simply teaching too much. I was, in my excitement for the subject, I was wanting to tell them, expedite their learning, tell them all about it, and it was counterproductive. And if I just kind of let them kind of go out and experiment and make some of those mistakes on their own, they would be invested in a way where they wanted to learn, and a lot of the work was done. They were actively wanting to know how it operates, and instead of me kind of begging them to pay attention, they were in that process fully.
I can certainly see the merit in that approach. I've long wished either of my kids, 23 and 21, to show some interest in photography, and my daughter eventually did. And somebody gave her an Instax camera, which she loved, and I was given an old cheap Nikon FG20, I think, and I just gave it to her, and it broke eventually because a knob fell off. But then she said to me, "Well, can I have one a new inverted commas camera for my 21st birthday?" So I bought her an OM1. Simon, you tried to sell me some broken one that you had, I think. But I wasn't going to give that to my daughter for her 21st. And I haven't really given her, I said, look, she'd got the basics. And I said to her, watch the little needle inside. If it's in the middle, that probably means your exposure's right. And I gave her some very, very loose guidance and some color film. And she hands a color film back to me and I develop it. And I notice things like some camera shake and stuff. And so I'll email her the pictures back and say, you're inside, you're going to really struggle, just taking a picture with such a slow shutter speed. And then that gives me an opportunity to tell her a little bit more about shutter speed. So she's kind of finding a way, and then she's starting to, she suddenly decides that she likes that sort of very shallow depth of focus look. And so that sparks another discussion. She said, well, how come that picture has got, everything that, like, the picture is sharp, the face is sharp, but everything else is out of focus? And how come this other one I've taken is everything's kind of in focus? So that, I haven't gone out of my way to explain depth of field to her and small apertures and stuff. But of course, her just experiencing it and then coming back to me with those questions is that she's learning, I think, in a much more effective manner, which sounds a bit like what you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. Just I think once they're interested in something they want to achieve, then it's that's kind of half the battle, And what we do, I think, for any of us that have been doing it any amount of time, we take for granted perhaps the things that we're doing, and so as much as I can, I try and work with analogies with the students, but also if I ask them how many of them drove to class, and operating a motor vehicle is a pretty complicated thing to do, but of course most of them do it without thinking much, and just tired, get out of bed, get to school as quickly as they can, and they're doing a pretty complex activity, and hopefully not while they're texting, and and so if we talk about photography, that some of them might get frustrated initially that they're not achieving the results they want, but it's quite a few steps, before they're going to get to a degree of proficiency, and they're okay with it, or I think they're at least have a degree of patience. And all of them, they don't have the same experience, perhaps. Those of us who grew up, without digital, we had Instamatic cameras and things like that, but photography was always a process, right? There was something, there were multiple steps. It wasn't, there wasn't that immediacy to it. And so I try to be empathetic with my students that their experience of photography is one where they don't have to know anything about it necessarily, and their devices are quite good at making really impressive images with very little skill. And so that's the photography that they've always known. And so I'm asking them to take on something that's the total opposite of that, that is heavy process, that takes a lot of patience and a certain amount of time and a certain amount of failure to be able to get sometimes even a basic result.
Right. I want to let's go back to your where we were before we finally got round to introducing you, and that was to do with your wet plate work, with your portraiture work in particular, which I talked about earlier, which I find really striking, and I know that Andrew wants to talk a little bit more about the process and preparation, but I just want to firstly go into these photos and the fact that they're using a very old method, yet the photography, the subject matter, the people that are in there, they're all very modern and contemporary. And that's not just a matter of they're wearing normal clothes. It's also the poses, the looks they give into the camera. They're not just holding a rigid position for as long as because they need to. I mean, there's I can see one photograph where there's maybe two. There's something close to a smile in there as well. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering about your approach to this type of photography in this modern world with such an old way of doing things, and what's your thought process behind that?
Well, as far as the portraiture goes, I'd never really done much portraiture in the past. In fact, it was the process that kind of got me into it, just because testing alone, portraiture was the I'm not having to drag the camera out on location. I'm not having to drag the chemistry out on location necessarily. And so I guess I could have photographed objects, but it seemed like portraits were a great way to kind of test and learn the process without the demands of going out. And even though a lot of what I'd done in the past had involved some sort of altered landscape or manipulated darkroom work that included landscape. And so, it's the process is closely tied to my entry into portraiture. And I think a lot of it too is just looking at the work of others. I think so much of it is just observation and seeing how others use it, both historically. So a lot of the techniques, that I might have seen, I particularly like the intense backlight and kind of forced vignetting in the background. I've done a lot, and I think I can't even remember the artist off the top of my head, but it was in the Art Institute in Chicago. I saw an exhibition, and this technique just stood out to me, and I thought, well, I'm gonna try that, or I'll see, a contemporary celebrity portrait by Dan Winters, and just as a technical exercise, I'll try and imitate the style of lighting that's produced there. And so some of this has been simply a product of fascination or trial and error, working with the subject, hopefully in a collaborative way where, it's not just someone sitting in front of the lens, but there is a dialogue between us. And then in some cases, the portraits are made purely as an expression of an idea that I have. So the person is standing in for a portrait that's meant to be more of a metaphor. And so I think I've got a variety up there. So there are a few that are more, traditional sessions where it's a portrait of that person meant to be indicative and evocative of that individual's personality or in that moment. And then others are certainly a person, but they're meant to be more symbolic.
I mean, going back to the old days, where there were neck braces and things like that to keep the people still. I mean, are you? I'm assuming you're using a lot of light, and therefore you're bringing your exposure time down considerably to what was the case back then. Is that the case?
It is. All these, or not all of, but the majority are shot with strobe lights, and so occasionally I will use a stand or a head brace, just to keep them in position. I found that it does okay a lot of times if I don't use that, because they're not having to stay still for any sustained amount of time. So the duration isn't really the problem. It's more to do with the depth of field, which is so shallow. I can't really stop down my lens because the process is so greedy for light. And so I have the lights pretty close to my subjects in a lot of cases, and it requires every bit of that light that I use. And so the aperture's wide open. And for that reason, they can't move, but it has less to do with them sitting still for an extended period of time. I
think that's the thing that I was going to mention depth of field. In fact, I started talking about it, then I realized my microphone was muted. I was wondering why Simon just ignored me. There's on this page of your wet plate portrait, says the guy with a beard. Well, there's a few guys with beards, but there's a particularly sort of scary one, 2/3 of the way down, where he's sort of lurching into the camera lens in a very sort of modern way, really, not at all old-fashioned portrait style. And the tip of certainly his beard's sharp, and his eyes clearly are bitingly sharp. But there's a pretty, I don't know, maybe the end of his nose is losing it a bit. But I was surprised at how much, is actually
I agree.
in focus.
I was thinking the same thing as well.
Certainly both eyes, all through his beard. I think maybe the end of his nose is losing it a bit, and his ears certainly are. But, it's not bad, is it, really,
Yeah, and I can't. That's an older one. I can't recall if that was a 4x5 plate I was making, or an 8x10. But in some cases, I'm using modern lenses. In some cases, I'm just doing large format technique, where I'm manipulating the standards to hopefully maximize where that plane of focus falls. And also, this is one that I did quite long ago, and there were a couple things I was playing around with this. We're just using the wider lenses and getting the subjects closer to the camera. And in these cases too, and this was more a product of my lack of equipment at that time, the lights were probably right on top of the subject. I mean, and at that time too, I had 2 or 3 lights just kind of jockeying for position together, right on top of each other. And I think this one too, you can actually tell there's always a giveaway when you look at the catch light. You can see that I had 2 lights very close together, and you get that double catch light in the eye.
I hadn't noticed it until you just pointed it out.
And I do that a lot too. I'll look at other people's work, and I'll look at the catch light to give me a clue as where they're positioning their lights, if they're using a single source light, roughly if it might give me a clue how big the light is, if I factor that into the, if I get some idea what the focal length might be of the lens they're using, and I try and deconstruct people's work that I'm attracted to.
Yeah, there's a lot of these of now you've pointed out, I've got those sort of too close together lights in their eyes, but I find that less distracting. Although than having two quite close together looks kind of all right. Sometimes when you get multiple lights in their eyes, that looks a bit can look a bit distracting. What if you notice it? But I'm not sure you always do, to be honest.
I think the shots are just so dramatic in their own
They
right.
are, yeah.
You're looking all over there. And you're not looking at the detail. You're looking.
No,
at
I wasn't until it was pointed out. To be honest, yeah. The shot of the girl with the hands around her face is particularly striking, I thought.
Yeah, that was one that was done more as, a metaphor. This was done. I had it in the exhibition. There were some strong reactions to it because, just like any artwork, people are going to bring their own baggage.
Absolutely, yeah.
But at the time I was making this, there were more and more articles I was reading about just the influence of social media on people's lives and how we're all kind of being, for better or worse, manipulated, or our attitudes and our responses are being affected and impacted by these invisible forces that we don't outright have a day-to-day interaction with, other than a digital interaction with them, an online interaction with them. And so I thought the idea of using a process like this that predates these things substantially just made sense to me, and I liked the idea of. And I had several more as part of that series. I don't think I've got them posted on my website, and they were all kind of the same character.
Yeah, I think I was just going to say for those people listening to the show, it really is worth getting onto Brian's website, and I'll just give stop. You're in the car at the moment. If you're listening to it in the car, just stop listening and go home and go to travisbrianlinville.com and just head over to his this wet plate section, and you'll see these fantastic portraits that we're talking about here.
Yeah, actually, one of the portraits I'm scheduled in the next few weeks is a portrait of Travis Linville. Travis Linville is the reason that my website is Travis Brian Linville. Travis Linville is a musician based in Oklahoma, and I learned about his existence when I tried to get my website and realized, surprisingly, I didn't think my name was a common one, that Travis Linville had already purchased the Travis Linville website. And we've been in touch on social media, and so he's coming to Chicago early in March, and I'll be able to take a Travis Linville portrait of Travis Linville.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I think thinking about the comment that Simon made earlier about the modern nature of some of these images, sort of thrown up against a really old process, and I do wonder if it's certainly it's evident in the guy who I referred to earlier, the one who's sort of lurching into the camera. There's almost an Instagram look about it, isn't there? And I think that's the thing. It's almost like some of these are, that one in particular could be just on your iPhone. You know what I mean? I don't mean that in any kind of disparaging way. It's just, I think it's some people that younger ones in particular perhaps are just used to having selfies, and there's a kind of different approach to having your portrait taken perhaps than there would have been 100 years ago. Some of them are more traditional. There's the sort of Indian guy there with a very striking beard, very very regal almost, and then the girl with the sort of grungy hair with the hand, and obviously the young girl with the hands all around her face, and there's a real modern aesthetic to them.
Along with a bandage as well on the finger as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Travis, tell us a little bit about for those who haven't listened to any shows, particularly with Joseph on, a bit about the process. Define some terms, and you've banded around ambrotype and tintype, but maybe you can just share with the listeners a little bit of detail about what those terminologies are and how you how you make amber types and tin types.
Sure. Yeah. So this was one of the earlier practice forms of photography in 1851. This process came about, and essentially it involves taking a sheet of metal or glass, and you have a prepared solution of collodion, which is a mixture of raw collodion and ether and grain alcohol and some iodides and bromides mixed together, and you pour this kind of viscous chemical onto a flat plate, and as soon as the air hits it within several seconds, it gets sticky and tacky and sets up. And so once it's kind of set up, you put it down into a light tight tank of silver nitrate, and in the space of about 3 minutes, the silver nitrate attaches to that collodion, and when it's done, under safe light conditions, you transfer that plate from that silver nitrate tank into a film holder made for wet plate, and then you shoot it much like you would any large format process. It goes into the camera, and then you expose it based on its sensitivity. The difference is that exposure has to be made while that plate is still wet. So that time frame can radically change depending on the time of year, the relative humidity, and things like that, the conditions. And so you come back and you develop that plate again under safe light conditions, darkroom conditions, and develop with an iron-based developer, ferrous sulfate developer typically. And I'm sure there are a lot of variations that I'm still unaware of. And as you know, lots of great artists out there right now practicing this and have been for some time. And so I started doing this maybe 2015 was when I first got into it. And already there were quite a few people doing it, but I think it's grown exponentially in that time in terms of the degree of interest in the wet plate process and just the accessibility of it, the number of companies that are producing materials and information that's easier to understand and follow, making it more accessible.
So is the choice of either glass or trophy aluminium, is that a purely personal choice, or is it the same? Are you coating glass and or the plate or the aluminium with the same base collodion material, or does it differ?
Correct. Yeah. The process is essentially the same. It's just a different substrate, and so those tend to be the traditional standards, either the or I'd say the modern traditional standards, the aluminum plates or the glass. But people use different things. I've made, in fact, maybe even some of these on the website are made on plexiglass, plexi types, and
okay.
That's nice because it's a more contemporary material. It has some advantages and disadvantages, but of course there's manipulations. You could do it to it post-production. You can melt it, drill into it, all sorts of different things that the glass might not accommodate. People work on different colors of glass to do these for their ambrotypes, and depending on how you develop the glass plate versions, you can either develop it so it's more of a substantial negative that can be used to make duplicate prints, or you make it an ambrotype, which tends to be a bit thinner, and you back it with a dark material, and then it appears as a positive. And from a analog photography standpoint, it's a really great thing to produce because in one object you get something that's both the positive and the negative, right? So you get the whole kind of history of that side of photography in that one object, where if you hold it in front of a light background, it appears as a negative. If you hold that same object in front of a dark background, you get the positive.
That's the same. Is that the same as a daguerreotype then? Because they or a cabinet, what they used to call cabinet prints, where you have a dark background to view and you produce a one-off.
In terms of the presentation, they share some similarities, but the daguerreotype came earlier, and so the collodion, the wet plate collodion, was the innovation that followed that about 10 years later, 10 or 12 years later.
So you mentioned ambrotype then. Is that using a different set of sort of coating chemicals?
So the ambrotype would be the the tintype process just done on glass instead of aluminum.
I see.
That is
Right.
ambrotype. And then if you, make subtle changes to how you develop that glass product, it'll be either an ambrotype, which means it's meant to be a positive once you back it with a dark material, or it's a glass negative, which it can still be backed and viewed, but people tend to develop it differently and use it more as a negative if they intend to print it and make prints from that.
I just want to apologise to Joseph Brunges, who I think he did explain that to us, and we've forgotten.
I've forgotten. So, I think this is the thing, isn't it? If you're not actually practicing it yourself, I mean, I read about all sorts of stuff that I then forget about, but once you start doing it, then you remember, don't you? It's like, I've been working in the darkroom for years, so I remember this stuff, but if I was just reading about it, I'd have forgotten. But as I did say, Simon, I can ask these. Really, I'm asking these questions. I know, really, of course, I know, really. But for listeners who don't, No,
it just gave. I must admit, I was a little bit vague on it myself. And then when Travis was just talking this through, I was thinking,
you remembered.
Oh yeah. He talked about this when he did a bit of a history lesson.
He did.
Went from one stage to the next, and
I think others probably have as well, who we've had on,
and will continue to do so in the future, no doubt.
Yes. Well, we spent a number of shows trying to work out the zone system for you, so now we'll just plough on and keep asking guests to explain wet plate work to us. Eventually, when we go on a Dave Shrimpton workshop, or maybe after we see him at our gathering in May, if we get some hands-on, Simon, it'll think into our thick skulls.
I think we need to see Dave before that. I mean, we've been talking about getting Dave on the show now for a very long time, and I think we need to. I'm not sure we can wait that long before we speak properly to Dave.
It'd be lovely to try and work out a time slot to go and see him.
Exactly.
Did you want to look at some of these emails that have been lurking around? Well, we've got Travis. He can join in and answer some, because we always like to get the guests involved in answering our questions.
That will be a very good idea.
Are you happy to get involved in a couple of emails, Travis?
Absolutely.
That's it. I was just going to say, Travis, I did send them to you earlier. Have you got them on your system in front of you, just so you can keep up with us? Yeah, excellent. So
I've got one open already, which, as I've actually got a couple of tripod heads on my desk, I thought perhaps we could start with that. This is the one from, I don't know how he's Baz F. He or she, I'm not sure. Baz, anyway. Yeah. We'll just call it. Apologise, Baz, I don't know any more than your name. Simon and Andrew, thanks for the great podcast. Always informative and inspirational. Well, thank you very much. I know this isn't the holy trinity of film photography gear questions, which apparently is cameras, lenses, and film, but do you have any opinions? No opinions here, Baz. On tripod heads for 4x5 cameras. I only started using a 4x5 about 2 years ago and just kept using the ball head on my tripod. But I've thought about going to a 3-way adjustable or maybe a geared head. So there would be handles and knobs for different axes. It's not easy to precisely level or otherwise adjust a 4.5 camera on a ball head, and it seems like I have to hold on to the camera base plate, move the head, which is probably not great for the camera. Any thoughts? I have one or two. Ben Reynolds, I think, was asking much the same question the other day, looking for a sort of definitive answer. But I'll throw my tuppence worth in for what it is. It's probably not... It's whatever works for you, I would say, but if you're going to be hiking up a mountain or working at the back of a car, that may also influence your choice. Personally, I've always just used 3-way pan tilt heads. I've got a humongous Manfrotto, which weighs probably more than the camera, Manfrotto 029 Mark II, which has a big 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 6-sided plate. What's a 6-sided plate called?
Hexagonal.
Hexagonal plate. That's it. Yeah. And that gives a very stable base, which linked to my big heavy tripod is great. as long as I'm not trying to carry it anywhere. In addition to that head, I have a couple of Manfrotto 804 RC2 heads, which have somewhat smaller Manfrotto plates, and they're my workhorse ones. I know other people use ball heads, and other people use fancy geared heads for different adjustments, but I think how you're going to use your camera maybe influence what sort of head you want to go for. And then maybe just go to a good shop that actually sells some. Like in the UK, you can go to Wex Photo in Norwich and try out a few and see what works or doesn't work for you.
I mean, I think we have actually talked about this before on the show, but I've got a
probably.
I think it's actually an American tripod. I think it's elevator tripod. I think it is, and it's pretty old, and it's not the kind that has you're talking about that octagonal. Quick
hexagonal.
Hexagonal, sorry, yeah, not 8, 6. So the hexagonal quick release plate. Mine doesn't have that. It's just the old-fashioned way of doing it. So the actual tripod. I can't remember which one's the Bush. Is that the? Anyway, I guess you know what I'm talking about. So
no idea.
Yeah, so you screw it in, and it's permanently with the head of the tripod, and then it will tilt forward and it will tilt to the side, and then you can swing it around. But what I like about it is it's got the grips on it to tighten it are big, and that means you can apply a great deal of force to it, and really any tripod worth its salt, especially when you get heading towards large format, it's just you've got to get the thing truly stable and rigid, and that really delivers on that front. Yeah, so you can, no matter which large format camera I'm using, if it's got quite tightly sprung, where you put the film holders in there, that the position is it's just not going to move, and it's just great having that level of confidence. And the problem is with these things, the lighter the tripod, the less likely you're going to have that ultimate rigidity.
Well, you can work with people like Ben Horn. He marches across the plains of Africa. No, he doesn't. Plains of Zion or those other national parks. And he has probably quite expensive carbon fiber tripods that are really light, but give him a tremendous amount of stability for his Arcus Twist camera.
Yeah,
but I'm working out the back of a car, so I don't really care. I don't go hiking up hills.
It's what's going to happen with the wind as well, isn't it? That's the other factor.
Yeah. What about you, Travis? What any thoughts about tripod heads or tripods? I see you've got a proper sexy wooden one in a photograph. You must be a proper photographer with a wooden tripod.
Well, the big 16 by 20 camera's on one of the old Century stands, but when I'm taking out smaller cameras, I should say, I mostly work with a pan tilt head, and so that's been just more a product of what I have, but I've been really happy with it. The ball heads, as flexible as they are, and as much as I like those for other uses, I find that invariably the camera at some point I'll not be paying close enough attention, and the camera will just want to flop on me, So I always feel a bit more confident, and I feel like there's a bit more stability with the pan tilt, and maybe that's, I don't know if that's accurate or just something that's kind of I've developed out of hobby, but mostly that. I've also seen, has anybody had any much experience working with the cubes? I've never worked with those before.
Not me.
Nope. Tell us more.
They're essentially just a tripod head that's a cube with geared movements in all three directions, and I've never worked with them before. They look like something science fiction based, but they're supposed to be pretty effective.
Oh, I've just
Arcus Swiss Cube tripod head.
That looks fantastic.
Ooh, look at that. So I've immediately there's a little video with an Arcus Swiss Cube tripod head, and he's turning these little wheels, and it's moving all over the place. That looks very cute. No, Not tried one of those. The ultimate tripod head.
Yeah, I've got gas for that now, but there you go. It's
that. Well, he's got a DSLR sitting on top of it. I'm not sure,
yeah,
but I'm sure
someone's got a Hasselblad on one there, so we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. But my advice, Baz, is to find a decent store. I don't know where you live or anything like that, and go and try a few out. Yeah. Don't, you ask a question. The trouble is, you ask a question like that on any of the forums or even in our lovely, friendly Facebook group, you'll get 1,001 opinions, and they're all right, and they are probably all right, but it's. You're the only one really who can. I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer necessarily. It's just whatever suits your style of photography, I would say. Okay, so any more words of wisdom from you on that, either of you? No.
I just want a cube now.
Yeah, me too. Ian Fleming, he of the train driving fame and
proper train.
It's a proper train. Yeah. Ian Fleming. He says Happy New Year. Well, yeah, Happy New Year to you too, Ian. Simon Andrew.
That's because we didn't do emails last time, did we? So we're a bit behind on this.
We are. Simon Andrew really enjoyed the episode with Max from Intrepid. He has really opened up LF to a wider market. Actually, he has, hasn't he? And made 10x8 accessible. Great shout out for Dave Shrimpton too. Yeah, so Dave's getting a lot of shout outs. He's obviously paying us well. Keep up the good work regards influence. It was just a fanboy email, really, wasn't it? So, Ian, we don't know if we're going to see you at the large format gathering, but we really hope we do.
Fingers crossed. And I know that Ian did a workshop with Dave as well.
He did. He really enjoyed that. Yes. In fact, I spoke to him on the phone about a few days before he was due to go down there, I think. Right. Yeah. So we have a couple more emails. Three. One from Paul Barden and a couple from a friend of the show, Jeremy North. I think probably, Simon, best idea to hold those over. So to the next show, if we remember.
Yes, I think we do need to do that. So because I think we're all running a little bit short of time now.
Yep.
So okay. So well, in that case, let us do some housekeeping first. And there's 2 weeks worth of this, but I'll go through this pretty quickly. And that's to say that thank you to those people that have donated to us via Ko-fi. That's ko-fi.com, and if you do a search, you can find our podcast page, which is the large format photography podcast page, which just helps us with the bills. So those people that have donated to us since the last time we mentioned this, goes back to the 22nd of January. Some have left messages, some haven't, and Dan Tree has donated to us without a message. Thank you very much, Dan. Greg Obst says, keep up the good work, guys, and thanks for the interesting, insightful guests. And then he's done a hashtag of believe in X-ray film. Thank you very much, Greg. Then we've got one from Shug Pug. Great podcast. Happy to support. Thank you very much, Shug Pug. Then we've got one from James Thorpe. Thank you, James. Christopher J. May has put in there, insert witty, large format related comment here. I think we'll let people's imagination do that, because I can't think of anything better than what he's already put there. So thank you very much, Christopher. Gretchen, thank you, Gretchen. And you've said thanks for doing what you do. Well, thank you for doing that too. Appreciate that. And then finally, I don't know how to even pronounce this, but I'm going to give it a go. Siolist. And he's donated us a coffee, so thank you very much, Sioist, and he's said enjoy. So thank you very much for those people who have supported us. Right, now then, let's quickly do some shout outs. So Travis, do you have any shout outs? Anybody you want to say hello to?
Your mum?
Oh, not this episode.
Okay.
What's typical?
Any other photographers, people that you want to point us towards, or other listeners towards?
Because the whole world listens to this podcast, you see.
Yeah.
So,
Right. Off the top of my head, I might need a minute.
that's okay. Well, what
This
we'll
might
do...
be a good time for a pause and.
No, that's okay. Well, what we'll do, I'll do shout outs for myself and Andrew. And actually, I'm just going to also just say that I ripped a photograph off your website. It's a picture of yourself with your two wonderful dogs.
That's great.
And it's gone down rather well in the large format photography podcast Facebook group. Because I just put a picture of you. I didn't actually say who you were. Just saying we're talking to this chap, and we've already had some comments. Dean Listorio said there, "What photogenic dogs." Slightly jealous because my dogs are Zone 0 and Zone 1. And then there's another one from Jacob Reynolds, and he goes, "Is this Travis Linville by any chance?" Had a great wet plate workshop with him once at the University of Kentucky for my alternative process.
Oh, wonderful,
class.
Wonderful, yeah.
And then finally there was, and I can't pronounce your name, I do apologise, but it just goes there. This is one awesome portrait, and it's a great picture. That is so. And you can see that portrait along with all the photographs that we've been talking about on Travis's website, which again is just www.travisbrianlinville.com. So don't forget the Brian, or else you'll get a musician. So Andrew, any quick shout outs?
Yeah, a very quick one to the well-known M from Emulsive. He posted into the Large Format Photography Podcast Facebook group about a week ago. He actually posted elsewhere, but I asked him to share it into our group. He's done a blog post on the person, forgive me, who was shooting wet plate work on the set of that new film, Little Women, you know, the one that was out Oscar nominated. And on the set, the stars had their pictures taken with large format camera and wet plate work. And there's a whole article on there with photographs, tin types. They were used to capture Shoahs, I don't know how you pronounce her name, Ronan, Laura Dern, Timothy Chalamet, Emma Watson, her of, Harry Potter. Anyway, there's a whole article there. I'm sure if you just go onto Emulsive's website and type in 8x10 wet plate, I think he was commenting that there just seems to be this massive upsurge in wet plate photography, and it was quite interesting that it's being used on the film set to record images of actors.
No, that's all good. I'll quickly do my shout-outs. One is a shout-out which I should have mentioned earlier when I talked about the photo walk in Oxford, and that's to Nasser Hamed, because, yes, Graham from the Sunday 16 podcast did a lot of the organising and publicising, but Nasser was a very big part of that as well. So it's great to catch up with you again, Nasser. And you did a great job as well, along with Graham, and a great group of people. And the other one is I just want to give a shout-out to the Homemade Camera podcast again. In particular, anybody that's interested in developing, then do listen to episode 39 of the Homemade Camera podcast with Daniel Keating. It's fascinating. The guy just comes out with formulas and how many grams you need of a certain chemical and so on. So if you can't get hold of the one particular developing method in whichever part of the world you are, you get in touch with Daniel and he'll tell you what you can go down to the shops and use as a substitute. It was just mind-blowing, absolutely fantastic episode. So do listen to that. So they my shout-outs. And Travis, have you thought of anybody?
Well, I would just say give a shout out and say hello to all my students, of course, at Elgin Community College, and I'm sure they're all tuning in. I
hope this is now part of the curriculum.
We'll see.
Well, it's Brian, Travis. Sorry,
that's twice you called him Brian. I wasn't going to pick you up on it the first time.
Oh, I do apologise. And that's the other Travis Linville's fault for forcing you to use Brian. So there you go. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been great. So.
No longer will you be known as Bob Matter's mate.
That's not so bad.
Right, and so on that, that's pretty much it. We've mentioned it a few times. We're in the we have a Facebook group called Large Format Photography Podcast. We do have this new Instagram feed. So again, Large Format Photography Podcast. We haven't quite worked out what we're doing with that yet, but we'll get round to it, and we will post some relevant information on there. And you can always write into us by send an email to largeformatphotographypodcast@gmail.com, and we will eventually get round to reading that out. And finally, our music is by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com, and it's called Two Finger Johnny. And we really like that. And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed this fortnight and a half's show. And it'll be great if you can join us again next time. So goodbye.
Bye. Say goodbye, Travis.
Goodbye.
we need to start rehearsing that.